Hi, my name is Crystal Jones, and I'm the director of the City of San Antonio's Department of Arts and Culture, and we are so really excited that you are here tonight. We also are live streaming this event, so hello to all the viewers online. And we are here for a very special panel discussion, and it is going to be a panel discussion honoring one of the greats in San Antonio, Jesse Treviño, and his significant artistic contributions to San Antonio. And tonight, I know we're each here for a special reason. Jesse, his life, his artwork has impacted so many in our community, and he was one of the very first artists that I met when I moved here over a decade ago, and a very humble and charismatic and undoubtedly talented person. And so we are just so honored to be recognizing his life and work today. Before we get started, I really would like to thank the San Antonio Library for hosting us in this space, and the entire team who is live streaming this event and also helping us set up. It's these partnerships between city departments that really make arts and culture and also the literary arts come alive. So thank you to your partnership. I also want to send a very special thank you to our team at the Department of Arts and Culture. I'm blessed every day to work with an incredibly talented and passionate team. And I want to specifically recognize Sebastian Mojardo, Stephanie Torres. I want to also thank Stacy Norton and also Christophe Michaud. They coordinated this entire event, pulled the panel together, even made the catalog or the brochure that you'll see today, the program. And it's just really beautiful, so thank you. If you're not aware, there will be a reception following the panel, so we'll hope that you stay and join us for that reception. So our department, I also want to recognize that our department is fortunate to work with the San Antonio Arts Commission, and they are a mayor and city council approved body that helps work with us on arts and culture initiatives to move and advance our creative industry forward. And Dr. Clark, who I will introduce, our moderator, she's part of the Arts Commission, and I'd also like to thank any other arts commissioners who are in the audience today or online. So thank you for your service. We are joined here tonight by very special members of Jesse's family, and there's many of you in the room, so I would really love for you to stand and be recognized. If you would, please stand if you're part of Jesse's family. And thank you for your commitment in keeping his legacy alive. I know we talked about that, and so thank you for sharing him and his work with us. As you saw when you were entering this magnificent building, the Central Library is home to many outstanding pieces of art. We hope that you saw that on your walk and the art walk on the way. And when the Central Library and the library organization contacted us back in July 2022 to tell us that they were looking to add more pieces to their collection here, it was at that exact moment that an art collector, Cindy Gabriel, contacted us and said, I have Jesse Treviño's Mi Vida piece. I want to put it in a place, bring it back to San Antonio where everybody can see it. And it was just that, almost that exact week this happened. So the piece out there, if you haven't taken a moment to sit and reflect, I please ask that you do that after we leave tonight. But it was just meant to be. And when we installed this piece with Jordan Petrius and Cade Bradshaw working on the project and Kimberly Morales working on the project, we knew that we couldn't just stop there. We had to have this panel discussion. So that's how tonight came to be. So with that, I really wanted to go ahead and let the discussion begin, because that's what we're all here for. And I want to introduce our moderator for tonight, Dr. Ellen Riojas Clark. And she is a highly respected scholar, and she's recognized for her expertise in bicultural bilingual studies and Latino education. And she was also a close personal friend of Jesse's. So Dr. Clark also worked very closely with us to collaborate on this panel and pull it together. And thank you for your commitment to that, Dr. Clark. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Punch the button, right? Welcome, everybody. This is really a historic night. and like everybody, so wish Jesse could be here. But he is with his work here, so we will discuss his work. We'll have time for you to do some questions and answers, and then, of course, we'll be able to celebrate afterwards. So watch the videotapes and so forth. And I am so happy to introduce this panel tonight. And I'll do it alpha, so that we just go right by it. And then I will ask each one questions, and they will respond to me. So the first one is Randy Beamer down at the end, who's an award-winning journalist who anchored News 4 San Antonio for many years prior to his retirement. I'm sure everybody remembers him, right? And in our community, Randy is well known for not just his reporting, but also for lending his time and talents to many multiple causes. And his leadership helped News 4 San Antonio raise millions of dollars over the years to help San Antonio families in times of needs. He's won 9 Emmy Awards, an Edward R. Murrow Award, top honors from the Texas Associated Press Broadcasters, and many other awards for his years of reporting, anchoring, photography, and commentary. So he was a friend of Jesse's, who met with him quite often, and he's also working on a program for KLRN, comprised of interviews he did with Jesse, along with interviews with many others. So welcome, Randy. Anthony Hurd is a writer, an editor, and author of several books, including Spirit, The Life and Art of Jesse Treviño. He has been writing professionally for more than 30 years, including covering high school basketball in southern Indiana. Weird, sorry, Anthony. Politics in Chicago, that's more interesting, and the culinary arts in Los Angeles. And he's a well-traveled correspondent, internationally and nationally. He has settled in his focus of people, places, and history of Texas. His writing has appeared in Texas Highways, Bon Appetit, Texas Monthly, Robb Report, among other national and international publications. His recent book, Texas Dives, you heard that right, Texas Dives, Enduring Neighborhood Bars of the Lone Star State, was published in August of 2022. He lives in San Marcos, Texas. Welcome, Anthony. And then another very close friend, Cesar Augusto Martinez. He was a major figure in the Chicano art movement in the late 70s and 80s, and we have known each other since then and remain such today. He was a contemporary and friend of Jesse's. Born in 1944 in Laredo, Texas, he was the first U.S.-born member of his core family. He was raised in his grandmother's Laredo household until he left for college in 1964 and became the first in his family to earn a college degree from Texas A&I in Kingsville in 1968. And that was a magical time for a lot of other Chicano artists in Kingsville. He was drafted into the Army and completed his basic training in 1969. After completing an extended tour of duty, so he shares that with Jesse, he joined friends from college in San Antonio, a hotbed of Chicano activism. Cesar became involved in CONSAFO, a seminal artist collective which included Jesse Almazan, Mel Casas, Roberto Rios, and Jesus Esquivel. And those two, Jesse and Mel and Jose have since passed away. Cesar's portraits are icons of Mexican-American art history, deeply rooted in his native South Texas and its Mexican-American culture. Martinez's work reflects a broad knowledge of the Western art canon and finds inspiration from color, field paintings, Mexican architecture, and photograph. And he's also a bullfighter. Most recently, 3 from Cesar's series, Sarapes from the 80s, were just acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. An admirable feat. Finally, recognition, or as Cesar says, who knew after so many years? 43 years later, to be exact. Híjole, we're old, right? Gabriel Quintero Velázquez is president and CEO of the Avenida Guadalupe Association, a neighborhood-based organization engaged in neighborhood revitalization and economic development in the near West Side, in the cultural epitome of the West Side. He received his BS in architecture from the University of Texas at San Antonio and has a long career history in various architectural offices. He was trained in activism by Albert Peña, no less. Velázquez served as director of the Inner City Advocates and was the first March event coordinator of the San Antonio Cesar E. Chavez March for Justice, serving for over 20 years. He is recognized nationally as an immigration rights activist and has served on numerous city boards and commissions. He founded Una Noche de la Gloria, contemporary art in the cultural zone. That's the west side of San Antonio. Gabriel was a close friend, advocate, and most importantly, a protector of Jesse Treviño for many years. So that's our panel. We welcome them. And I will just be directing my questions to the panel as a whole. On this first one, you'll take 5 minutes to answer each one, and then we'll go down the line. So tonight we're celebrating the return of Mi Vida to San Antonio. One of Santos Martinez's statements in the brochure is that Mi Vida is the artist's most forthright and honest work. What are your impressions of this work? So what are your impressions of Mi Vida?
This one? Yes, okay, we're on. I think that, well, let me start somewhere else and I'll get there. Jesse participated in a very important show here in San Antonio way back in early 80s, maybe 1981, it was the opening of the San Antonio Museum of Art. And it was a show about, it was about photorealist work, photorealism, paintings that looked like photographs. And there was a lot of amazing things there and done in a good variety of different ways, not exactly this, not exactly that, but in that range. And Jesse's work, a body of work that he had come up with was within that the parameters of that show. So it was a good fit. The thing about it is that it defined him as a photorealist, and I'm not sure that I don't entirely agree with it because Jesse was a lot more diverse in his modes of expression. And yes, Mi Vida is fairly realistic, and in fact, I'm going to contradict myself, but I think it is very sharp. It is almost photographic work. The work that was in the photorealist show at Sama was a little bit more diffuse, a little bit more impressionistic of a photograph. So it's very ironic, but I think it's consensus here in San Antonio, where Jesse is so well known. I think that starting out, he was already a living legend, so that gives you the scope of his renown. But I think that maybe definitely is his best known work, and the one that where he had to dig deep into himself to come up with it. The images that allude to his injuries in Vietnam, also the future, there's a woman, there's all kinds of stuff in there, the medal. And I mean, what else can I say about that? You know, I think it is his most important work. But it's not the only thing he's ever done. He's done notable work in different mediums all over San Antonio. I mean, who hasn't seen the angel in the hospital? I mean, that's monumental piece. Defines monumental, has to be one of the biggest works of art in the world. And, you know, so that's what I think. I'm looking through the door here at one of his mural-sized paintings, and that's a wonderful thing. Have I answered your question?
Yes.
Don't want to get long-winded.
Thank you, Cesar. And again, Anthony, what are your impressions of Mi Vida?
It's actually overwhelming every time I see it, because I had the good fortune to talk with Jesse a lot about this. I've always called it autobiographical without being a self-portrait, because he took bits and pieces of his life to tell his story. What I also can't not see when I look at it is Mel Casas. Mel Casas was a wonderful art teacher and an even better Chicano activist who taught Jesse at San Antonio College. And he taught Jesse to prepare his canvas with black. Instead of having a white canvas, he painted it black to begin. And that helps the colors become more dynamic, that helps the images come off the canvas. And it was very important at the time because Jesse was very angry and very emotionally hurt when he started this work around 1970. It took him a couple years to finish it. He did it in his bedroom. Not only did he paint the canvas black, but he painted his bedroom black, and he covered the windows so that for the longest time he was staring into the abyss. And it took him an awful long time before he finally figured out what he was going to paint. And he told me his very first brush stroke was of the prosthesis that is front and center holding the Purple Heart. And that's when he knew it was going to be an autobiographical painting. So I think Mel Casas, and we'll talk about him more, I'm sure, was very influential because black really was his mood at the time. He held nothing back in that painting. The pill is Darvocet, which is a very powerful painkiller. There's Budweiser. There are the Viceroy cigarettes. These are his vices. These are the things that he was self-medicating with and decided not to leave them out, but also put in the Pandolce and the Mustang. And he put in an image of himself as a soldier. The interesting thing that I have come across time and time again, including just a month ago on the radio when Randy called in, is that when you first look at it, you might be tempted to think that that's Jesse front and center. If you look quickly, you might be able to think that. An awful lot of people think that that's Jesse, but it's not. It is a woman named Joanne who he had a brief relationship with, but again, he told me it was very important. That relationship helped him get over other parts of his life that were a little bit tough. he wouldn't tell people who that was for the longest time. It was a mystery. And I interviewed Jesse over the course of 3 years for this book, and it was one of the last questions he would answer. But it came with me asking it at least 100 times beforehand, and he'd just say, maybe I'll tell you sometime later. Maybe I'll get around to that. I think it's important for Joanne because she was at the right place at the right time to be in what is clearly one of his most important works. So if none of that made sense, that's because every time I see it, it's overwhelming, and it's hard to find a place to start. It's hard to find a place to end by talking about this painting, but it was almost everything of his life up until that moment. And it doesn't define his work as a whole, but it certainly found its place in the story and the history of Jesse because it was just so incredibly honest. And so it's a wonderful piece. I've been told that I get to take it home tonight, and I'm really happy about that, but I'll end there because I think I have my time up.
Thank you, Anthony. Let me just repeat for those of you who've just come in, we're discussing Mi Vida, and Santos Martinez's statement that it's the artist's most forthright and honest work, the opinion of one person. And so what are your impressions of the work, Gabriel, you that knew him so well, and then, of course, Randy?
Well, I have a relationship with the painting that's a little bit maybe holistic in the sense that it also represents a pinnacle in Jesse's ambition. So this work of art was selected for the Artists Respond exhibition that went to Washington, D.C. that was really the most comprehensive dialogue in the arts around the Vietnam War. So I took Jesse to D.C., me and my wife Jennifer that's here, and we had a wonderful time in D.C. And you know, the relationship I had with Jesse would often put me in a situation to answer his questions. So someone would ask him a question, and if he wasn't able to answer, he would look at me, and then I'd have to answer, which would end up me looking at him to see if I answered right? But after a while, I wasn't answering questions anymore. I began to understand him better, and we reached a point where I was almost telling him about himself, which was a very weird situation to be in, but it was a very intimate relationship with Jesse as it relates to Mi Vida. There was a person that had asked about the painting, and the way that I got to understand the painting, and with respect to, you know, maybe the man and the painting, was that it was part of Jesse's evolution, part of his dealing with his trauma in Vietnam. So where I might disagree with Anthony with respect to the idea of the black canvas, the way that Jesse reinforced my understanding that he was in a very deep depression for a very long time. And Mi Vida was him emerging out of this depression. This is not the entire depression. This is just a couple of years, right, within the process of this. But that these elements were him rediscovering and discovering and looking into a world that was, you know, filled with so much pain and disappointment, but also challenge, right? So it's a place that he got to see his hand become eloquent again, right? Even more eloquent, really. But at the same time, dealing with the idea of the soldier, the outcome of the soldier, the prosthetic that is a consolation with holding a constellation that is the Purple Heart. So it's almost to say, well, here's the Purple Heart, but look what I got for it. In the context of the pain and the pain medication, and but also popular culture. You know, there was some really fun stories about that Mustang and Jesse. So he also was a very hip guy. So see, inside of all of this, there's in the painting, you can see the story of a Vietnam veteran who's come home and who's locked himself in his room. And he's talking to himself on the wall. And he gravitates toward beauty. He appreciates love. He's stuck on pain medication. He's got a prosthetic, but he also can paint. And you see the black canvas is important to the Consafo theory as it relates to Jesse and Mel Casas, but the whole room was black. You know, that's a psychosis, you know. So it's important to I think to be able to recognize that Jesse's a symbol for a lot of the great artists that are in San Antonio that are former Vietnam veterans. And in the leadership that Jesse provides in the arts, that the icebreaker, the one that broke through the barriers, he was also having to break through the barriers for the Vietnam veterans that were coming back that maybe weren't artists. So it's very, very painful, very significant, though.
Thank you, Gabriel. Randy?
I just want to mention a couple things from talking to Jesse. I was able to put a microphone and a camera in front of his face for a while when I just hung out with him for the last couple of years. He would almost always talk about the future. He didn't necessarily want to talk about the past that much, but when you could, and I'd interviewed him all kinds of times over the past 40 years, that's one of the things that came up is Mi Vida. And one of the things, I've been editing this documentary, so I'm looking back at interviews, and one of the things that struck me was he talked about the Purple Heart, he talked about his prosthetic, he talked about, and there's a quote here, my favorite Budweiser, and the Darvon and all this, and then his voice got very quiet when he talked about the woman, and there was an old girlfriend in there too. And it's kind of, in a way, I think representative of how he sometimes talked about other people, that he was very private about his personal relationships and his kids and his family. Very proud of his family, but he was just more quiet about them. And another thing I just wanted to mention about that as well, I know, drove home the point to all of us about how he learned from that not to paint on a wall again because he thought that was so important to him that he was blessed that Cindy Gabriel thought that she could get it out of there and did. There's a couple other things that struck me about that painting as well, that the soldier in it, him, I guess, is black and white. Well, everything else is in color. And so it kind of distances him from that. And also when I talked to him about it, I remember him talking about, he was very proud. He started with prosthetic and then put all these other things in, but he was very proud that he said you couldn't tell which of those things you'd put in first because he designed it like he did so many things in his head as it developed on the canvas. And that's one of those things that's so much about Jesse aside from what he put in there. And I would agree with that, the pop art kind of references, because that, he's called a photorealist, but, it's realistic depictions of those items, but it wasn't necessarily, the New York photorealism of the time when you had, images of the street and things like that.
Thank you, Randy.
Sure.
Remember these, because when y'all go out for the reception, I want you to really focus in on the painting. We haven't seen it in San Antonio in a long, long time. So you look at it, and also we can have informal discussion out there. What are your impressions of the work? How honest do you feel it was? I will not give you my opinions about that. But now, Randy, since we're just going to go alphabet way, what is your favorite Jesse Treviño work or groups of works, and why?
Well, I'll be quick because A, there's no teleprompter, and B, there's so many people, everybody has it. What I would encourage people, I mean, Progresso, that's my first print that I got of him. I loved, covering things in San Antonio because, especially on the west side, they're so much more colorful. And he caught that. But there are some that people haven't seen yet that I've seen in researching this documentary for KLRN, shameless plug. But there's one called Zarape, and I don't know if Juan Vasquez is here, but it's a, and you've seen it, there's a corner building, and I don't know if it's on Commerce, if it was a grocery store, you probably have seen it, that it's kind of a teal blue at dusk, the building against a bright purplish blue background. And there's so many like that that I hope that we're going to discover in the next years, that there's so many paintings out there that need to be in museums, and it's just an awesome painting. If you can see it, it's at Juan Vasquez's law office. I know he'll be annoyed when you go there. It's on the 14th floor of the Weston building, but it's a great painting, and it's a take on one of his corner building paintings, but I think one of his best. And there was one other thing that it shows why his use of flat colors, and somebody wrote about it once, flat as a virtue, that it helped in terms of what he wanted to represent, that it wasn't just photorealistic, that it didn't, the details of the clouds. But anyway, Zarape, Z-A-R-A-P-E, and I think it's a store. You'd know more about that.
I think it was a dance hall.
Was it a dance hall at one time?
And we will have time for Q&A after we get through. So Anthony Hurd, what personal interactions, reflections can you share about Jesse Treviño and his work?
Well, I'd like to start by actually saying hello to everyone, because I've met so many people here, and I interviewed so many people here, especially his family, for the book. And I always have to apologize to everyone that I didn't interview, because if I had a nickel for every person I didn't interview about Jesse, I could buy Mi Vida tonight. But in terms of getting to know Jesse, I have to thank Gabriel. I had written a story for Texas Highways about Jesse's show named Mi Vida, and I wanted to write his biography, and I talked with Gabriel for a long time about it because I was very nervous. And Gabriel said, you just got to go in there and plead your case. And so we went to Mi Tierra and sat, and Cesar was there, and a few other, you don't remember that though, do you? Do you remember when, well, forget it. When I was asking Jesse if I could write his book, there were a number of wonderful San Antonio artists there, and I think you guys did that on purpose just to intimidate me. And because everyone was saying, don't write about Jesse, write about me. Jesse, by the time I got to him, had been approached by so many writers and filmmakers and directors that when I told him I wanted to write his biography, he eventually agreed, but I don't think he actually had too many expectations that it was going to get done. There had just been too many disappointments about this. But what I discovered was that he had given hundreds of interviews over the years, and just nobody had sewn them all together in one book. And during those hundreds of interviews that I read, he was answering the same questions the same way. It took an awful lot of personal interviews, time with him, before he would realize that I wasn't just going to accept the same answers. I wanted him to go deeper. And a lot of this was based on encouragement from his friends and family who said, tell the real story. And so it took Jesse a long time to actually open up to me. He gave me the standard answers for a long time. Now, when I realized I had arrived in Jesse's life, it was about 2 months before the book actually was published. I had been interviewing him for 3 years. He got cancer the first time, which slowed everything down. And about the time he was going into remission, I got cancer. So there was a lot of downtime. He started getting frustrated that it wasn't coming out. I finally took over some pages to his house, some proof pages, showing him what the book was going to look like. He didn't look at them. He basically said, I've been listening to your promises for so long. Why don't you just get out? And I got thrown out of his house right on the eve of it coming out. And I realized, I think I told Gabriel, I've arrived. I got thrown out. Jesse was so generous once he finally got past the point of determining that I was going to follow through on this, that he opened himself up in a wonderful way. And I've said it before, the book is about 80,000 words, but I cut about 200,000 words. His story is just that deep, and there's much more to be told about his story. And I always encourage audiences, write your own book about Jesse. If you've got a great story, just start, because there are so many more stories about him that are out there. It was a wonderful, frustrating, enlightening time, and the things I saw through his eyes are remarkable. And I think that's it. How about that?
Jesse was a very diverse human being and had many interests. And it wasn't just the fact that he showed a natural-born talent. He was, in fact, a bit of a prodigy when he was young. So there's no question that as a professional, he was everything that a professional is supposed to be. But something that really impressed me about Jesse, I guess it is related to his work. I was telling Anthony that there's a picture in his book that I took of Jesse, and he had built essentially a sculpture, but it was a sign for a gallery, Galeria La Raza. And in spite of having only one good arm, he was very good with power tools, and he could build things, and I have to brag a little bit, I'm good with that too. And I've even done a lot of artworks that are actually involve old pieces of lumber and metal and things that have to be together with power tools. And want to hear a joke? I lost a finger. I remember cynically making a joke about it. Hey, I'll be the next Jesse Treviño. But it's never worked out that way. But anyway, no, as an artist, Jesse was, like I was saying, Jesse could work in many different modes. And the way that I look at his work is, I see some work as being somewhat impressionistic and somewhat fussy, even though they're supposed to be photorealism. Others, I kind of look at them like they're abstract, because that was an interest of mine when I was in college, and it influenced me a great deal. So I see a lot of flat surfaces, especially in those paintings that he did of storefronts in San Antonio. Those are very beautiful, very flat, but then again, that's photorealism. If I were to take a picture of you from here, I can see the depth and everything, but it all comes down to a picture that is flat. And so that is the problem that an artist works with. But I see those paintings of storefronts as very abstract, almost like a Mondrian painting in some ways. But no, he had that covered, and I think that he should be given the credit of being so diverse. I think that we were focused a lot on Mi Vida when we started out, and no question, that is his deepest painting, the deepest painting that he ever did. But everything is just fine. I don't have any nits to pick with his work. Another piece that Jesse did early on was a very large, very extensive mural. I think was it at Our Lady of the Lake? I believe, yeah, Our Lady of the Lake. And that's kind of different, but it is reminiscent in some ways of with Mi Vida, because it's different things that are juxtaposed on very long pieces of canvas, and so that's another aspect right there. I got to San Antonio in 1971, and I don't recall exactly when I met Jesse, but I had been doing some project documenting what Chicano artists were doing, and I was photographing their work and all of that. But I met him very early on, and I remember we used to socialize sometimes, and we would end up at his house on Mulberry, I believe, where Mi Vida was. And I think I may have seen that work in progress, and it was very, very interesting how he put that together. It came to him bit by bit. But another thing that, going back to something I already said, an example of how diverse he was, I noticed that he was making a one-story house into a two-story house, and I was amazed at the taste, personal taste, as well as the skills that he used to build a staircase and a whole new room on what used to be an attic, and considering his political clout here in San Antonio, I don't know how he got away with it, but yeah, I do have a good idea, because you're not supposed to do two-story houses in that neighborhood. I don't live too far from there, and when I was going to build a studio, I wanted a two-story studio. I was told by the city, no go, we can't do that. So my applause to Jesse for having the clout to do what he did. But anyway, I hope I covered your question.
Thank you, Cesar. Talking about his skills, one of the interviews we did for him when he was remodeling Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, and he had his hand, and he was cutting all the mosaicos with his hand. Well, I call it his hand. And I mean, precise. They fit exactly. And he said, no, I don't use, tile cutters. He knew how to, he was so skillful that he could do it just eyeballing it and with his hand. Amazing guy. Great story. Gabriel, what is the impact of Jesse Treviño's work beyond the local level? Why has Jesse's work had such an impact beyond a regional one?
Well, that question is a good opportunity to educate. The art world is a world in itself. So it has its own magazines, it has its own heroes, it has the professionals, the people that make careers, you know. So I see Elaine Dagan and Lisa Ortiz here, and then I'm reminded of another name, Carol Lee Youngblood. These are people that we could say are unsung heroes of the art world, right? Because along the line of those professionals that manage artists, they're also responsible for how far does an artist go, right? So you can have a very, very famous artist that you all know that artist's name, and that artist might have painted 1,000 paintings in a little town, and nobody knew who they were until they died, right? Because you know, art can I guess is a commodity too, right? So it's important to know that in Jesse's long career, it was a very long arts career, that he was very published. So when we think about, I heard some questions in other conversations where, do you think that the world is going to know about Jesse? Do you think that, you know, and you know, the way that I understand those kind of questions is, like San Antonians, we all think we're the center of the universe, right? We're like New Yorkers or like people from LA. And sometimes we forget that we're really a very well-known place, and the people that are here, their reputations are known very far. So Jesse's already really well-known. He was published in Art in America a very long time ago, and I think Mi Vida is the image that was in Art in America. But when we think about, you know, the most understood art movements, I mean, you know, I come out of an architectural background, so we study, you know, the Dada movement, and then you all know about surrealists. Well, Jesse, Cesar, Mel Casas, and some that really are the godfathers of that movement, like Chista Jesus Cantu, our Jesse Almazan, is an incredibly prolific artist, that as a movement, they are that Chicano movement that will be known in perpetuity, forever, as the world begins to read the books and as people begin to write the books. They will never be forgotten. And Jesse represents inside of that movement a leader. Like Cesar was saying about Jesse being a prodigy, I think one really interesting thing is that by the time he was 18 years old, Jesse considered himself a professional. So before he went to Vietnam, in his mind, he was a professional, which is interesting because you can see some of his early paintings. And when I was around him with some of his early paintings, he was very proud of them, but he did not consider them to be of his quality yet, right? The Vietnam War interrupts this career, but when you study his work from the time that he leaves high school to that period that he's studying under William Draper, he becomes this incredible, I mean, it just occurs, I think, because now he's studying in a group of his peers that are the quality of Jesse, right? So, you know, William Draper, there's a letter from Draper to Jesse, and I think it's sometime when Jesse's headed to Vietnam where Draper, you can tell from the few words in this letter that Draper is just in awe of Jesse already. He already knows the future of Jesse. So now Jesse's in New York, and we say, well, how will the world know Jesse, or how will the world remember Jesse, or how important is Jesse to the world? Well, they knew. It just so happens, though, that he was brought back by fate and fortune. He was brought back to San Antonio to discover who Jesse would be, right? You know, and the conversation that we've been asked to participate in has had me really thinking about that perhaps if Jesse had stayed in New York, nobody would know who he was. And if he had stayed in New York, perhaps he would be a great painter amongst all the great painters that existed. But I do know because, like, I had the fortune to hang around with Jesse, ask him questions, and just kill time, right? I don't know if you know, one of the things I know about Jesse is he loved to do nothing. right? When he was doing nothing, he was dreaming, and that's a wonderful place to be hanging around with a guy that's dreaming all the time. But what I do know is that him returning wasn't about him coming to San Antonio to not be known, to be a San Antonian. Him returning was really William Draper and him painting the kings and the queens, and for whatever crazy reasons, Jesse saying, you know what, that raspa man, it looks just like that, right? So it's a tough question. It's a tough question, but what I really appreciate about the question is it gets to our opportunity to share the history that is well known in the art world. Believe me, the art world can only dive deeper into Jesse. The citizens that knew the son of San Antonio, it's our opportunity to be educated in the arts via Jesse and Cesar, who is collected at the Metropolitan Museum, right?
I'd like to address a little bit of about the idea of Jesse being a regional artist or San Antonio artist. And I think there was a context in which all of us were existing at the time, those of us who called ourselves Chicano artists. We were not getting any traction here in local galleries. They would not touch us at all, let alone the art world in New York. So all of us made choices. What is more important, when I was very young in college, I would look at the art magazines and I sort of figured it out. You want to be a real artist, you got to be in New York where the action is. Well, that was a sort of plan, but I never followed up on it. I decided that what I was involved with here in San Antonio, where many of us, with the Chicano civil rights movement and also the art that went with it. And in a nutshell, all of us are where we put ourselves. There's no conspiracies out there that keep us down. If I had gone to New York, I can't predict what would have happened, but maybe I would be a famous artist. But when I got here to San Antonio, I remember that the name of Porfirio Salinas would come up all the time. He was San Antonio's artist. And his validation came because I believe he was a favorite artist of Lyndon Johnson. And at some point, I started seeing Jesse as occupying that space because he was very actively working with local themes and pretty much staying put. I remember that we used to coincide in many exhibitions, but that kind of like petered out over time. And next thing you know, he's pretty much on his own. It was all about local projects, major projects, I might add. And so he was working in that context, and he became, not Porfirio Salinas, he became Jesse Treviño.
Can I say one thing? Can I say one thing on top of that? I think that's a perfect segue. Jesse and Cesar and the Consafo group and others, what they did was they made the world see Texas art very differently. It was all landscapes and cattle and bluebonnets, and that's what Texas art was until Consafo and other groups started putting their communities on canvas. And so all of a sudden the world is seeing a whole different side of Texas and Texas art. And Jesse and the others were instrumental in changing the way people view Texas and Texas art and Texas artists.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. At the end of my courses, graduate courses at UTSA, I would always invite the students to the house, and we would study you know, all of the artists would had come and presented. Well, the last evening, it was, I don't remember if you were there, but Jesse Almazan was there, just like me with his oxygen. Mel, who never went anyplace, and not forgotten who else was there, but anyway, most of the guys were there, and Jesse walks in at the end, and with his two cousins, remember, and so the students are just impressed and watching them, and they started discussing, and the question was a 40-year-old question. What is Chicano art, and who are we as Chicanos? And here they are, all in drama. No, ¿y qué? And my students are backing out. It was before the days of video cameras or digital cameras. But anyway, the students go back, and all you saw were these guys still immersed in that question of who are we in this world and what is our role in this world. And it was just incredible to see them because Jesse Almazan would take off his oxygen and go, and then he'd go back in. But anyway, it was a great evening to watch them, and those kind of discussions were there all the time. Thank y'all for your impressions there. Now, most of us know Jesse for the work that he has, and his initial interest was in portraits. And that's what he studied, and that's what he went to New York to do, to study portraits. And that's how he made his money with his friends drawing pictures of their girlfriends. And here in San Antonio, one of my ex-students said, "Oh, he used to walk my mom home." And I said, "He did?" "Yeah, and he painted her." I said, "You're kidding. Can I see the art piece?" Anyway, in her living room, she had the picture of Jesse that he had painted of her, and he would never talk to her. He would just walk next to her and he would walk behind her and carry her books. And then I said, "Well, you know, she has a masterpiece on that wall." So portraits was what he began with. And now I'm interested to know from you, how does his work evolve and change throughout his career after his return from Vietnam? How do you deal with portraits?
I think that a lot of people have the impression that I do portraits of Pachucos, I'm well known for that, but they're not really portraits. A portrait is a different discipline. I invent characters that look like what they're supposed to be, maybe more so, because I have an enhanced eye for detail. That is what we remember, the enhanced thing. So they become almost theatrical. Like, who looks more like a Pachuco, you know, than Eddie Olmos in Suit? I mean, he was like the Pachuco, personalized that. So anyway, what I do is not portraits. And what Jesse was doing when he started out were real portraits. I've seen some of that work, wonderful renderings of human, not just faces, but the whole human anatomy. And I think that at some point, like so many of us, he had more and more things to say, and then content started expanding. But I don't think that there's anything different in Jesse than the rest of us. We all go through those phases. We expand, and by the time we get to be my age, you become kind of like, I'm not bragging here, but it would like encyclopedias. I know a lot about different noses, about ears, about mouths, about expressions, non-expressions, and on. And I could go on and on like that. It's kind of like a repertoire. And for me, that is my repertoire. I don't work with the idea of painting hair the way it looks like. I am making hair in terms of paint. When I do a nose, I'm not drawing a nose, I'm making a nose. That's how I feel, that's my attitude. And I think that Jesse also, this is not about me, so let me move on to Jesse. Jesse went through that process in his own way, and I think that he found a need for content in his work, and that is why you have works like Mi Vida. That was very early on, and it's kind of ironic that he also wanted to do something a little bit more detached, and that is where the more so-called photorealistic work comes in. But I mean, that is exactly what a professional artist is. You keep on adding chops as you go on, and Jesse kept doing that. But it's not just technically, it was also the thinking that goes into it.
Thank you.
I want to add to that. When Jesse was passing away, in that period of time that he was in the let's call it, for lack of a better term, the hospital. He and I were working on Rosita Fernandez for the side of the Alameda Theater. And part of that is a project that, God willing, will happen, whichever wall it is. But the theory behind the model of how this project would occur, Jesse knew that he was not going to get on a scaffold. But it was the idea that this was the real opportunity, and this is to talk about the evolution of Jesse Treviño as a person. And there are people here that I know knew Jesse very well. So when Anthony says that Jesse threw him out of the house, that's a really, really, really important thing to know about Jesse. Because even Santos Martinez will tell you that when Jesse was working on Mi Vida, Santos would go and visit Jesse, and sometimes Jesse wouldn't open the door. And Jesse loved Santos. So Jesse was a tough character. You know, he carried very strongly with him a very West Side, which is, I don't know what that I mean, you have to know what that means to know what it means. But also he had all these brothers, so Jesse was a bit of a tough guy too. But in that evolution, you could get a sense of this kind of really guy with strong conviction, and that evolution to a period where he understood, at least not rhetorically, but that it would become his responsibility to make sure that those traditions that he believed in, which he really believed in the tile form as an original San Antonio form of making art, that there were factories in town that produced hand-painted glazed tile, and that he wanted to be the proliferator that brought this back, not as an art form that he liked, but as what he believed was a central form of permanence in the arts. So make no mistake, the reason that the spirit of healing is not a painting is because Jesse knew that if he was going to be around 2,000 years from now, it would have to be tile, and it'd have to be that high-end German tile, that the glazings would be there. So when Cesar says, this is not about me, it is about Cesar. And that's where Jesse was headed, right? Into this last project, or of the projects that would be done by other artists who would take on the hand and the confidence and the objective of saying, I want to do some work, but I want to do it in a way where I know I'm going to be around. Jesse was critical of some of the mural work in the West Side. He loved the art, but in the back of his head, I think he always carried the idea that there's no guarantee that these works are going to be on those walls. There's no guarantee. So he was always trying to create a dialogue where he could convince artists that worked on walls to find a method of how to do these works in a way, if something that was going to happen to this wall, that they would be able to remove the work. Because who would be able to tell you this as an artist that sees a wall and they want to keep the art on the wall, right? And how dare you tear this wall down? Well, Cindy Gabriel took the wall out of the house, you see? So there's a sensibility within the wisdom of the professional that was Jesse. Ellen, when we talk about Jesse as a portrait artist, well, you know, if Jesse was already famous to him by the time he was 18, you have to know that he was sought after by Billboard people when he was real young. Because the Mexican American in the arts was relegated to the commercial art world. So the great artists of San Antonio come out of commercial art school. And you have to say Fox Tech in that Jesse Almazan, Jesucista Cantú, Joe Esquivel, and Jesse with the idea that they were going to be these commercial artists. So when he went to New York, obviously he moves into this space of the portrait artist. But I think the greatest thing to know about the evolution of Jesse is that you have to pass through that. So if you're going to produce a pop art of Marilyn Monroe, well, you're first going to have to prove to the world that you are all that and that you can really paint. So Jesse was a person that had passed through the space where he was just a great. And you know, I met Jesse working on architecture. And trying to, and go figure, right? As a student, trying to get Jesse to say, "Hey, Jesse, I've got this design, and I have a place in it for you," right? So, you know, most artists would say, "Well, it's yours," right? But that's not what Jesse did. Jesse was like, "Yeah, I want to do this theory," right? And if you see the work that's on the buildings, particularly La Veladora, this was the artist leaving the canvas and really entering into architecture. So we say, what was Jesse? He was an artist in evolution.
And I just want to say real quickly about the portraits. He was very proud. He wanted to, if he was born 30 years earlier, he would have been an incredible illustrator, one of the golden age. He had an incredible knowledge, and we talk about it, of N.C. Wyeth and Howard Chandler Christie and J.C. Leyendecker and the Leyendecker brothers, all these artists and illustrators. But then when he came back from New York and was doing paintings of people, he wanted them to be icons. Like, he did a lot of people as commissions, but the one, Los Pescadores, that he did for Juan Vasquez's grandfather, or the cotton pickers, it's iconic. That was a commission of a person, than which he made so much more, and then put Juan Vasquez in it. But he also talked about that he didn't want to do the same painting over and over. He didn't want to do like some people, in fact, he said something about, you see the same guy painting 100 different versions of the same painting. So even if he did portraits as he did, and they were somewhat similar, they had to represent a class of people, everybody, not just that one person. And he talked also about the spirit of healing, that it was suggested that he should do more, you know, there should be children. And he thought, no, this is just one person, that doesn't need to be more than one child representing the children of San Antonio. And so his portraiture, I think, would have gone a whole different direction, and he talked about that as well, had he stayed in New York. It would have been more painterly, it would have been more William Draper, it would have been more mainstream. And he was also one of the last ones, and I'd like to get you guys to talk about this. In that era, he was unique in going to the Art Students League of New York, which was one of the more traditional schools at the time compared to a lot of others who were much more abstract. And William F. Draper wouldn't have taught at a lot of art schools, it wouldn't have fit in. But he liked going there. He chose that partly because of that, over the Chicago Art Institute, aside from it being New York. But he had that traditional sensibility always. And one other thing I wanted to tie this in with, where we're talking about legacy and whether he's going to be known, is that sadly, and he was proud of it, but he was also worried about it. He was in the Smithsonian 2 exhibits, one Chicano exhibit, one Vietnam. Those, he didn't want to be pigeonholed. And he said several times in several interviews I've looked at, you know, I'm known as a Chicano artist, I'm known as a Mexican artist, but I want to be known as the artist. And that is why he, till his dying breath, was always looking at his next project.
We were in D.C., and when we walked into well, we had him in a wheelchair. He could walk, but we could get a lot further around in a wheelchair. When we walked into the exhibition, Jesse stopped and he says, "Gabriel, do you realize what this means?" And I said, yeah, I know what it means. And he says, no, do you realize I've worked my whole life to be in here with these artists? And Mel Casas was in that show too. So there was a reckoning along the lines of what part 2 of your book, right, is that he did arrive where he wanted to be included with the artists that he considered to be his peers. But there was a collision. I mean, imagine you're dreaming of a wonderful career, and then you get sent to war. I mean, this was. I mean, look at this. 1964, they start the draft, right? So 1965, he's leaving. There's not even enough time for the world to really understand what's happening. He goes. He's got a vision, and this interruption occurs that threatens the possibility that any of you that have a profession, imagine that something happens that threatens your livelihood and that threatens your dream. And then flash to the front, all the way to the future, to where it's perhaps the last thing that you do. And it so happens that the respect that the world is about to give you has something to do with the very thing that threatened your future. So there was a reckoning that occurred there, and I think that he had to reconcile that he was all of the things. The thing that he ran from, the thing that he was all of it. So it's nothing to say that there's no way to say all of it, but it's this wonderful story that I know we're going to all learn.
I want to start with something that Gabriel said. When Jesse was 18, he considered himself a professional artist, and he was, but he was a professional commercial artist. He had paying gigs through his teacher, Catherine Alsop, at Fox Tech. And when Jesse was 16, actually, if you go through his sketchbooks in high school, you could tell Jesse had his heart set on being a great fashion illustrator. He loved fashion, and he loved illustrating it, and he told me he was pretty convinced that he was going to get a job for a department store, and he was going to be drawing the newspaper ads. He was very good at it, and he got an awful lot of work, paying work that way. But he always said, if I had the chance, I would be a fine art artist, which is why going to New York was so important to him. Everything he had learned up until that point, it wasn't just William Draper, but William Draper was a very important person in his life. It was all broken down, and it was rebuilt based on color and shadow. Not so much how you drew something and then painted it in, but where the colors went. That really really showed the authenticity of the work. So he was going to be a great commercial artist. He gets this great break, goes to New York, has a master class in painting from life. Then we all know about Vietnam. What I find is the most significant thing to occur to him after he got back from Vietnam was meeting Mel Casas, because where William Draper taught him how to put your brush on the canvas, Mel Casas taught Jesse, what do you want to say by putting your brush on canvas? And Jesse had already had a moment in Vietnam when he was injured where he said, if I got another chance, I would put the people and my family of San Antonio on canvas. Mel Casas was incredibly important by giving him the confidence to, in fact, put what he wanted to put on canvas. So that, I think, took him from the portraiture area of his life into a different form of portraiture, because if you look at those buildings, like Randy was talking about, those are portraits. Those are deep portraits. They're just not of human beings. So he put as much love and attention and emotion into drawing a building as he did the Raspa Man, or any of 1,000 people who he did portraits for in San Antonio. So I give Mel Casas an awful lot of credit, and Mel Casas was one interesting cat, I can tell you that much. That guy was tremendously important, and he was broadly philosophical in everything he talked about, and he gave Jesse a lot of confidence to say, what you want to put on canvas must be important to you. And that's really, I think, where that part of his evolution solidified and again, that went to all the other Chicano artists at the time, getting in galleries and getting in museums and showing the world what Texas art was really like. So it was, in fact, an evolution from a possible fashion illustrator to a portraitist to Jesse Treviño.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, I'm the only woman up here, right? And I spent countless of hours interviewing Jesse Treviño along with my two colleagues, Daniel Gonzalez and Adam Rodriguez. And for me, he was a very, he was a literary figure as well as a visual artist. He painted with words. So my talking with Jesse was about his mama's comal that was double the size of anyone's, sus tortillas increíbles, the fluffiest, Ellen, the fluffiest. And, you know, you could hear it in his voice. And her eggs, ay, no más no. I mean, he would describe the food that his mother made. So for me, it was a portrait from his heart and his mind, his memory, and his taste buds. And then we had countless discussions, because I'm writing a book on pan dulce, countless discussions about pan dulce. Pero Ellen, you know, las conchas, he would call me La Ellen. That was his name for me. Las conchas, you know, you had to go to I don't know what the name of the panaderia was, I don't remember right now. And his mother would send it with the money, and he would stand there and smell and smell and smell. So to me, he took in so much from his surroundings that he portrayed in his artwork. So whenever you see a face, or whenever you see black, or wherever you see conflict in his drawing, it's because he had not painted some of those things. So I have little snapshots that he did of his pan dulce paintings. I think, Elaine, you probably have some of those. And they're exquisite. Nombre, this is pink cake. And so I'd have to ask him about what pink cake meant. But anyway, Jesse talked artistically. He painted with his words. He was a masterful storyteller about his familia and the love and the values and the traditions. He spoke to that all the time. So my interviews with him were different, though Daniel and Adam would ask the war questions and all that, and I would ask the questions about, well, how did you feel? And he could speak about his feelings so eloquently. And so Jesse, I think, in his portraits, including his mother's, when you look at her, when I see her, I see the comal and her beans, because he's talked eloquently about that. So I think that all of you have different views of of Jesse, and he had so many that he didn't have a chance to really talk about. So I am so happy to have heard all you guys talk about Jesse, and I wanted to give you my personal view of him and how he adored his mother. He adored her.
And before,
So, mil gracias.
if I could
Yes,
ask
yes,
you,
right.
we haven't really heard as much from you as I would like to have heard.
Sorry?
But I'd like to hear from you and everybody here about the Consafo days as well, because that's one of the eras I don't think people know a lot about. And where because he was one thing we haven't talked about, he was incredibly competitive. You mentioned he's very verbal, but as Gabriel said, his activism wasn't throw your fist in the air and protest. It was sentimental. It was what our values are. And how that developed and what that means for his legacy, because if anything in the art world is sentimental, as you said, that could be the kiss of death in terms of a legacy.
I'm
because it's
sorry,
not-
I'm going to disagree with you.
Well, I'm not
Because
saying, I
think
don't
his-
want it to be,
I
I'm
think
just saying it could be.
His activism was in painting the faces
Right.
and the buildings of our community with depth and with understanding. So the Consafo days were una época in our time. You know, I was a non-artist in the group, so I just listened a lot and told him to settle down.
But he wasn't a protester.
Pardon me?
He didn't protest overtly in his work as some of the others did. And did they talk about that? And was there a little bit of,
Oh, they all discussed. So the discussions were very verbal, very heated, and José Esquivel would, bring it down, and Cesar later on would also bring it down. But anyway, I think that the Consafo Day Symposium is another one.
Ellen, there's something that when talking about any person, we all have our chapters. One of the things that was very special to Jesse was his brother Juan is here. And Jesse talked about his family all the time, all of them, and it's a giant family. He was very proud of his nieces and very proud of his brothers and all of that. When Jesse was in the war, his brother was at Stanford. And his brother got involved in what would eventually be the Raza Unida movement. And we're talking about at the base root of the activism, of the hardcore activism. Jesse would have said that he was young, when he left, he didn't get a chance to pursue his education. So he wasn't really plugged in. When he left, it was his brother that had relationships with Henry B. Gonzalez, because Henry B. did a good job of having a relationship with his constituency too. He was a master of it. That it's his brother that wrote the letter that got Jesse brought back from Japan and brought to Fort Sam so that Jesse could heal here. But now while all this is happening, Jesse eventually gets to San Antonio and his hair starts to grow long, right? And he's not necessarily a hippie, but he's living in that world where there are protests, and he's very clear that he was proud to enjoy the rights that he had, because in the back of his mind, he wasn't a citizen. So I don't really, he and I talked about it a lot, but I mean, it's very hard to understand, well, yeah, but he might as well have been a citizen. I mean, how do you not have a citizen? But he made a connection between himself and the dreamers, but not so much that he was a dreamer, but that he could imagine how they must feel. I'm not trying to get political, and in all the years that I knew Treviño, it's important. He and I were very good friends for decades. That if you can imagine that when I met him, I was being mentored by Albert Peña, And I was in one of the most aggressive activist organizations in the history of this city. And Jesse wasn't the kind of guy that would like turn his back and walk away because he was afraid of activism, right? It probably has something to do with one. But in all of that time, Jesse and I never talked politics. Can you imagine that? Just knowing how much I talk, how are you going to keep me from talking politics? But the thing about that I learned, because in that I matured politically. You know, Jesse was a result-based activist. That means that your rhetoric means absolutely nothing if you don't achieve something. And achievement isn't so much about opinions, which is really kind of like formative activism. Our yelling and our fists in the air is kind of formative because we're mad and we want to be heard. But what good does it do to be heard if you don't do anything, right? So think about a guy who has his eye on a wall and says, I'm going to put the biggest mural in the history of the world on that wall, because it is the largest mosaic in the world. So if we understand that the activism of the artist in that period was busting through the wall to get walls for artists. So they had their objective, right? But when you mention Mel Casas, you say Mel Casas is important. But you could ask yourself, would there be a Mel Casas if there wasn't a Felipe Reyes? So Felipe Reyes is the one that really politicized the art movement, and Felipe might be the guy to yell charge, but he'd probably run quick to his canvas and start painting, because that's what his activism was. And then we look at Chista Cantu, who was really kind of like very important to Jesse. But, you know, then you have to learn that Chista Cantu was related to Mario Cantu, who was a bit of a troublemaker and was not able to stay in the heartbeat of the Chicano art movement. So now, what does Jesse do, right? We're in the center of that activism of the Chicano art movement. But their objective, I would say even Cesar, would be a little deeper into the Raza Unida, which is a little bit more political, for political gain, right? So those artists that had that mentality to say that, okay, our fight are these walls, they weren't able to get exhibitions in the San Antonio Public Library. And when you get to the El Grupo that predates Consafo, these guys were so good that even the Texas Watercolor Society couldn't keep them out because they were that good, right? Jesse then emerges with these guys who are trying to figure out how to get on walls. Jesse actually becomes a mechanism for not only getting on those walls, but getting in the Smithsonian, right? It's a very rich story.
Thank you. And we're going to open it up to Q&A so you can ask all the questions, and we can have Randy ask the Consafo question again if you'd like. Now, I want to thank you all because this was very, very interesting. But I want to have Jesse to have the last word. So we're going to see him right now in a short little script talking about his art on one of the last times I talked to him.
The only mural that I've done on the wall was on my house that I lived on Mistletoe. And Sidney Gabriel bought that house, and that mural is in the convention center right now. Because the city wants to have my work there. But that mural is going to the Smithsonian on an exhibit on the Vietnam era.
Bravo.
I'm part of that.
That's great.
I wasn't just in Vietnam, but I was an artist, and it's going to have all kinds of artwork that was created during the Vietnam War, and that mural is going to be in it. Anyway, if you see the projects that I've done, they're, you know, when I look at some of the murals of Diego Rivera and some of the public art is when I became even more interested. Besides museums, where
and your art, and are they related to the studio?
the public, you know, to me, it was important that it be something that was going to last. and I know how to do it, and I know what it takes, and that's what I want to do. So yo creo que la veladora, that theater will fall down, but that veladora will still be up because of the way that it's constructed independently from everything that's around there. If it's I did a mural at the Casa Navarro here at the Jose Navarro. It's on a stone wall, but the way that mural and those tiles are on that wall, they're not where if it moves. So you know, everything that you have to think about, make something that's going to last for years and years after we're gone. That those murals are going to be there, like some of the classic artworks.
Well, your mural just
That was Jesse. That was Jesse, and right next to him was Joe Bernal, who had been his teacher. Can you believe that? When they got together, it was incredible. Now, Q&A. So, ask your questions, and if you can stand up and just tell us your name and ask a question directed to whoever you would like. Yes?
My name is Belinda Gavalos, and I'm president of the Friends of Casa Navarro. So it was nice to hear him describe the mural on the side of Casa Navarro.
That's right.
My question is, has anybody thought or have you been thinking about putting together the catalog raisonné of the works of Jesse Treviño?
Thank you for that opportunity to tell you this. Prior to Jesse's passing, I said probably within the last year, he and I formulated the Jesse Treviño Art Conservancy. And the organization that I'm the president CEO of is the Avenida Guadalupe Association, that many don't know. The very first fundraiser for the redevelopment of that community that led to the construction of the Plaza Guadalupe was led by a fundraiser that was the Progreso, printing of the Progreso drugstore poster, that if anybody has that historic poster, it says, created for the fundraising of the Avenida Guadalupe Association. It's very, very important because the organization was very special to Jesse. One of his friends was the founding director, and we were able to form the Jesse Treviño Art Conservancy that actually took on Jesse's private collection, his personal collection, and we will be going through the cataloging of his work, which is really cool because in his retrospectives, there has been good cataloging of his work, but there's a gentleman that I met at Jesse's funeral that is a policeman of the family when Jesse went to New York to live with, and he has this picture that Jesse drew back in those days of him as a baby, a painting that has never been cataloged, right? So it seems that the great opportunity now is for people that have his work, and there's a lot of people that Jesse gave work to, for us to be able to archive that work and to have the most comprehensive catalog of Jesse Treviño's work. And there's going to be thousands of pieces, we're sure.
You're going to do that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we really kind of do it, you know. Jesse would call and you know, Gabriel, the lights on this is not working. And I said, well, why are you telling me? Because if you don't fix it, who's going to fix it, you know? So we've been working on stuff for a long time, so we're there to do that.
I remember hearing of consafos y consafos, and I thought, well, I know what it means in Eagle Pass, and I know what it means in Robstown, and I know what it means in Corpus Christi, but I couldn't figure out what it meant in this group. So, Cesar, if you could tell us, what did y'all consider consafos to mean? ¿Qué era la intención y qué era el significado de decir consafos, soy consafos?
I consider Consafos a very important local group. Unfortunately, it went through changes, and over the years I have become better known for leaving Consafos than being in Consafos. And the reason that I left Consafos is that I was very much engaged with the political side of the Chicano movement. And even though it would be unfair to say that Consafos as a group, the members, were not into that, they certainly were, and their work showed it. Very important work was done. But very quickly, Consafos tried to formalize ways in which we would supposed to comport ourselves for exhibit, which it's like we had to ask for insurance and transportation of the works and all kinds of things that were not being done for us at that time. Now, I mean, like if somebody wants to show my work, I'm okay, and a big truck shows up and takes it away. But that was not the case, and that was keeping us from exhibiting and being more politically engaged. Me and some other groups or other artists who had come in with me from Austin were also very much engaged with the political end of things, and we would be invited to exhibit anywhere, wherever there was some movimiento activity. I remember one show where we had to hang our work on a curtain, and it was like wiggling, and that sort of thing. Consafos would not do that, and it's okay, but that is why we left. It's very interesting regarding Consafos that somebody wrote a very good piece on me. And it is rare when that happens. A lot of the times academics get it wrong because they don't consult with you. They consult with somebody else who wrote something, and they may have gotten it wrong usually. But anyway, the person who wrote this thing about me, it's in a book about the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. I'm in their collection. And like I said, a wonderful piece, everything was wonderful, was right on, except one tiny little detail. It said that I was a founding member of Consafos. I was not. So that was wrong. But I have a friend, maybe he's here, I don't know, Ruben Cordova here. Ruben Cordova wrote a book about Consafos, very well researched and vetted. Everything that he got was very accurate. And he makes a point of saying what I just told you about my history with Consafos and why we left and so on and so forth. But I told him, when I saw this in a book, I said, guess what? I'm a founding member of Consafos.
I'm actually curious as to what you have heard Consafo mean in like Eagle Pass. What have you heard?
Consafos means whatever you say to me. Consafos means whatever you say to or about me to anyone, even if you say it to God, is going back to you double. Te va a doblar, bro.
And I think that is
Consafos.
yeah, I believe that is essentially the definition that they accepted here in San Antonio. Mel Casas told me in El Paso it meant to slip away from a situation unscathed.
Right. That nothing can harm you.
Yeah.
Whatever, like if I do a tag on something, I put a Consafos on there. If you do something
Right.
About that, you write over it or something, you're going to be,
Right.
you're going to pay
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
power of the universe is going to get you.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
I know that we talked about the painting on view here, but I wanted to ask a question only because we have the family here today, and I want to know if any of mis hermanos are here today, because that's one of the ones we have a print of. So if you raise your hand, or you have any hermanos
familia.
of mis hermanos? Ah, look. Awesome. Your dad. Thank you.
She's, okay, and then you, Claudio.
My name is Luis Mercado, and I was going to ask a question about whether his work was political or not. And you kind of, from different perspectives, presented something. But I was at an art show, and Jesse spoke, and somebody asked him, why is your work not more political? And he says, I just don't want to do political artwork. But he said it, you know, and it ended right there. He didn't go beyond that. And I mean, the fact that he even studied under Mel Casas, who Mel Casas' work is very political at times. And like you all presented, I mean, even from Beamer's presentation to Ellen's, it's a different view on the political aspect of his work.
Well, I think it might be more similar than you realize. Maybe I misspoke or it was misinterpreted. He, at one point, was talking about when he came back from Vietnam, and he said, you know, a lot of us are not represented in the mainstream, and that he wanted to do that. That was a statement, and that is, as you called it, activism. You know, nobody cares but I care, and it may not have been as overtly political as Brownies of the Southwest and some of the Mel Casas paintings, but that was as political as he got because he also wanted to be accepted by the wider world. And that we really haven't gotten to, is that was one of the things that he had to jockey through with the different groups that were looking up to him, and he wanted to please them all. But I think that controversial side of him
Well, look,
wasn't part of it.
no, Luis, look, he painted a portrait of Henry B. Gonzalez. So someone could say, here's a portrait of Henry B. Gonzalez. But you have to know the relationship between him and Henry B. Gonzalez. Now, knowing that Henry B. was his beloved Mexican-American congressman, well, by the time the Vietnam War is in its full motion, the Mexican-American world becomes Chicano, it turns its back on Henry B., and Henry B. turns his back on the Chicano community, right? So, and there's stories of the Brown Berets being subjected to all kinds of name-calling by Henry B. I think that one of Henry B.'s people punched Willie Velasquez in a famous story, for real. So Jesse was very loyal to those that. I mean, I think today we're in a world where people pick their political person based on what they hear on television. Jesse lived in a world where your political heroes were those people that you knew, that you could touch, that met you, the ones that went and knocked on all of the doors, right? And Henry B. represented so much to Jesse because he also got Jesse out of, so to speak, Vietnam. Now, if you look at the painting No Te Cabes Kelly Field, which ties to Henry B., you were asking, I don't know if you asked about favorite paintings. To me, that's my favorite painting. The man's sitting, he's just a Kelly guy. He's sitting there and he looks like a president, but there's a tag on the sticky board of the guy's desk, and it says, No Te Cabes Kelly Field. That is immensely political. But see, you have to know what's happening at that time, right? So, and then there were relationships that Jesse had with real people in the politics. So you would say that Ronald Reagan appreciated Jesse's work, for real. Hillary Clinton, when she went with the first ladies of Latin America to celebrate Latino arts, she selected Jesse of all the Latino artists to go in Air Force One and fly to Chile. Whenever Governor Perry came into town and wanted to have lunch, he did have lunch with Jesse Treviño. And I mean, there's a luncheon that we had, and there was a reporter, and we didn't know the reporter was going to be there. you know? And the maturity that it takes, I can tell you, because even the next day, an article comes out in the Express News, I'm telling stories, right? Comes out the next day, and somebody comes up to me and says, Gabriel, we didn't know you were a Republican, just for having lunch with the governor, you know? So Jesse was a very mature actor in the real world, a world that I think we could do a better job, all of us, of understanding that you know, politics to us represents the tension between the two. But in the real world, politics is the delivery of the resource that, what was the modern definition of politics? Who gets what, when, and where, right? That's what you're taught at the university. So,
I'm sorry, there's a political hermano right there that wants to talk, John.
I just wanted to mention one painting that I'm 4 years older than Jesse. But when talking about politics, I could talk forever about that. But the painting that I wanted to mention was that when he was with No Casas, we talked about No Casas. He gave his students a theme. They had to go painting with a theme based on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's maybe a not so famous painting, but it's a beautiful painting. It's huge, it's long. And the good, he has the yellow zapata. And then the ugly has the food stamp that was being used a lot for the poor people. And the ugly is a Mickey Mouse watch with that spiral avenue as a Mickey. That was pretty political.
Actually,
But those were rare. Those were rare. He would rarely on canvas do what you're talking about, because he stayed away from the conventional trappings of politics. So while that painting is extremely political, I would argue it's much deeper culturally, a cultural understanding of what's going on in society. But it definitely overlaps with politics. But I think your brother tried to stay as far away from those conventional trappings because he didn't want to be known as on one side or the other, despite his personal feelings.
I asked Jesse one time.
If I get home, I remember San Antonio where it was with, my family, my friends, and so he wanted to say, I'm going to paint San Antonio, so forth. Okay, but look, he wanted, especially the west side, he wanted to take things that we just saw as kind of ugly or unimportant. La panaderia, Progreso drugstores, the Raspa Man, everything that we kind of just drive by and say, well, this and that. He tried to make that beautiful. Look at how beautiful the panaderia is. Look how beautiful, the drugstore is. The Teatro Guadalupe, La Poblanita, the little bakery, La Gente, the family, los hermanos, and all that. So everything he did to try to put beauty into what people saw in San Antonio is, well, there's kind of nothing there. And now we see all the beauty of San Antonio through his paintings. And to me, in a sense, he raised up, what a lot of us have wanted to do was to put some dignity into our people. They were not just, under the serape or lazy or whatever. But there was beauty, there was art, there was intellect, we had literature and art and everything. And that's what my brother was. He wanted to do, the poor, things beautiful.
Do you have a question, Claudia?
Well, yes.
What? Okay.
I just have more of a comment.
Okay.
My name is Dr. Claudia Treviño Garcia. I'm an associate professor of instruction at UTSA, and I say that with a lot of pride. Because our family is here, and I wanted to recognize my tios, but I wanted to recognize my cousins, because it's another generation. Jesse is still here, will always be here. And our children, some of our children are here, 2, 3, 4 generations, right? And my cousin Alex, El Guapo allá, with a reporter who has always also we've always talked about Jesse as an artist, but he was a tremendous man, not a perfect man, but he was a tremendous man. And just about a week ago, I was talking to Gabe, and he made a comment that I think I shared with my daughter about, we were standing at Plaza Guadalupe after El Día de los Niños event, and we talked about, or he mentioned to me, like, this wouldn't be here, this would not be known, going back to what my tío said, if it wasn't for the paintings and the subjects of his paintings. Because we realized that our Jesse's legacy, and that's what he wanted, I heard everybody say it, and we heard it many times, that he wanted his legacy to continue, not for him, but to remind our children that they are valuable, that they are worth more than money and how much you make, but that we need to continue to fight. So in that sense, it was a political thing, that everything he drew was to make the political statement, I think, that we are worthy as Chicanos, as Mexicanos, as Latinos, as however you identify. But my question, or I guess my plea, is that we continue this so that future generations continue to learn about Jesse in curriculum, because my work at UTSA in the Department of Bicultural Bilingual Studies is to prepare future teachers and not to forget to teach about not just Jesse, but everyone else that looks like us, and that we continue our history and that we continue the contributions, and just how can we help as a community to do that? I even thought, and I talked to another professor who teaches a whole class on Selena. Can we teach a class at UTSA in the Mexican American Studies about Jesse Treviño's life? I would love to see that.
George Cisneros has a question. George Cisneros has a question, and then we'll take, the last one will be yours, okay? Okay.
First of all, I've known Jesse, I guess he was maybe, I remember when I guess I was about 5. And my first friendship with Jesse's family is George, because we were both born in the same year, and we lived 2 blocks apart. And Henry and Jesse were a little bit older, and they hung out a bit more. But George and I were kind of like friends because we weren't jocks. And we really didn't get into the baseball in the street and all that kind of stuff. But we'd spend a lot of time together. But I knew Jesse in a different way because he was the guy that came every Friday afternoon to the print shop to get paper from Don Romulo. And they would make pads for him that were everything from 8 by 10 to 11 by 17. All of his drawing stuff that he used when he was in high school, that was a scrap newsprint from the printing shop Munguia Printers. So that story is really something that we all know that. And if you have an early Jesse drawing, it's on Munguia paper probably. But I want to say something about context and why the Vietnam issues and the war issues hit our neighborhood in a very different way. Our dads were mainly World War II vets. And you go up and down the street, the Breseños, the Contreras, the Muzucas, the Treviños, the Vandewallis, the Bendalis, Cisneros, the Peñas, the Robledos, the Perezes, all the way down from maybe Rosillo to Hamilton. Those families, the guys were all World War II vets. And they all mostly ended up in civil service. So they kind of kept us, in a way, very patriotic and very American-loving. And despite the issues, we were supposed to still be very American. And that was something very, very strong in that neighborhood. Middle class, working class, civil service guys, and they were everything their sons. And if you look at that neighborhood, Roland Mazuca, Roland Breseño, for a while, Tomas Rivera, Jesse Treviño, Henry Cisneros, Santos Martinez, Porfirio Salinas, what's his name, Portillo, the musician, Gussie Peña. There was like all of these artists and people that came out of that one little neighborhood. And I was kind of like the experimentalist of the neighborhood, and I did my stuff, which is different. But Jesse used to make the joke that people would ask, what is it about that stretch of Monterrey and Buena Vista that made all of these artists and all these people? And he would go, lechero. He would always make that joke in public. And it was really something. And I just want to say thank you all to the city and the crew. And Cesar, I love you for yours. Anthony, your books are great. Gabe, keep up the struggle. You've inherited the mantle of many, many people. Randy, keep your stuff going. We want to see you at Cannes someday with your documentaries. But I'm going to tell you a naughty thing.
We are going to have those last two questions. It sounds like he's saying it's over. Why don't you go ahead and do your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll get the one over here, okay? Since they're right next to each other.
I want to hear the story.
Well,
Yeah. That's for, during the reception, you can ask for the story.
I spent a lot of time with Jesse in summer '71, and then again starting in December of '71 through maybe July of '72. I spent a lot of time in the black room, and we were both self-medicating. And Jesse would tell people not to bother him and leave him alone and all this stuff, but he would always bring me in because I knew how to manicure and roll a perfect joint. And and he liked the amount that I rolled. It was just a little bit of a buzz because he didn't want to go too deep, and I did. But the thing was that we talked a lot, and in those conversations, the one thing I remember the most was we don't know anything about ancient history unless it was in clay, the cuneiform, the pottery, everything. So by '72, he was already thinking ceramic. And so anyway, I can go on and on with full stories. Anthony has probably 2 hours of me talking about Jesse. But thank you very much. The family, this family is so important to the West Side. The Contrerases, the Briseños, the Romos, we all grew up together. So thank you very much.
When we speak about legacy and how eloquently my Uncle John was talking about the different paintings and what and how and why did his work, would like a quick response from, if you would, Gabriel, maybe Anthony, about how did his work get accepted? How did the Avenida Guadalupe, paintings like La Fe, get accepted and appreciated by mainstream America? Was he one of the first ones because of his, he compared himself to the likings of Norman Rockwell and the Draper and these elites? Because we still, there are articles out there that say Jesse Treviño, the regionalist, muralist, a wonderful, great regionalist, but more than a regionalist, an American artist, a world-renowned artist is how I like to start the sentence. So what was it? And just talk to me a little bit about that. I'd like a quick response.
Anthony, you want to respond?
Well, look. I met Jesse the way that Santos Martinez met Jesse, same, totally different eras. My mother told me, you need to meet this person because she read about him in the paper. And that's a long story, but the painting of his mom was all of our moms. So not today. Today, I don't know how people will see that story, but where the unfolding of, when that painting was seen, remember, it was seen for the first time at that year, right? So that generation, the generation before, the generation there, the generation coming after, but living within the context of that period, we saw something that can only be described as artistic excellence. The world knows artistic excellence. So if you want to go to see, I don't know, what is it, the Van Goghs are in Amsterdam, right? You may have seen it one time on a postcard. You'll see it, you'll know artistic excellence, and your better senses will gravitate toward it. The thing that is Jesse Treviño is, okay, we local, and we've got to run the risk of localizing him. He's all that. And then we combine that with the story of the man that, I mean, you know, we don't think twice we watch Platoon. The leading character in Platoon was a Chicano. They had to change his name because they wouldn't think anybody would go to the movie, right? Very interesting, right? that the cultura in San Antonio is that global. But there is a point that I wanted to make, is to me it's very important about Jesse, Consafo, Chicano, and all that stuff. And even in the context of being very careful about saying about us. Jesse was not a guy that wanted to be categorized as us. He was a leader in the Mexican-American community, yes he was. But you know what, you can't say Jesse Treviño without saying Rosemary Kowalski, you know, who I like to think of as one of the leading Chicanas in San Antonio's history. Because there hasn't been anybody more supportive of Mexicanismo and Chicanismo than Rosemary Kowalski, who started their business, Uncle Ben's, on Zarzamora Street, right? So one of the things that's very important about Jesse's legacy is that Jesse's legacy is not merely, it emerges out of the Mexican-American paradigm, yes it does. And Consafo and Chicano, it isn't really but the longevity of what is Chicano art, because in the art world, Chicano art is a period. It's not just that you're Chicano, you're painting, it's actually a period, right? So what is important to remember about Jesse and that legacy that he leaves us to care for is the stewardship of the universality that art is. He wanted to be there, and he ended up with the greats of the world. So he takes us all and gives us the challenge that the leadership that comes out of, let's say, the Mexican-American community is the leadership of leaders in the arts and leaders in the politics that lead for all peoples. And that's why Jesse's so represented, because maybe we thought that's a painting of my mom, but the reality is a black mom, a white mom, a mom of any culture, a son can look at his mom and no matter what ethnicity they are, you can see your mom. That's why they compared it to Whistler's mother, because it's just at that level, along with the other paintings. So.
Thank you. And the last question over here, and I'm just hurrying it up so that y'all can go to the bathroom and get something to drink and eat, and then discuss among ourselves.
Howdy, thank you. I just want to thank y'all for this gathering. My name is Marlo Romero. I'm a philosophy student, and I grew up in San Antonio from early 90s to early 2000s, and just the impact that Treviño has made. Like you said, I think what Jesse, this is a testimony, but also a question, that Jesse's mural work is so present. I'm a SACE alum, and under Cruz Ortiz, I studied under Cruz Ortiz, but his work created a homogenesis of identity of San Antonio, right? As a Latino, as a Chicano, I could identify this city is embracing of the cultura compared to my other Latino friends outside of the cities who struggle with that reality. And also a question examining Treviño's work is that it has a deep metaphysical reality. His abstract works, and I would argue that all his work has an abstractness to it, right? That it has a metaphysical reality and a spiritual dimension, right? And it's part of the cultura of the Chicanos and Latinos. But I'm curious, his personal life experience of faith, spirituality, religion, what was it like in those discussions or in the family? What did he experience? Because his work has that depth. I'm curious, what does that mean for his conception of his work and his own life?
You know, Jesse went to Chiapas, right? With Max Navarro, they went to the jungle. I mean, you know, all of those stereotypical experiences that we would think. No, Jesse he is that person. You know, on the conversation about the depth of politics, I really do believe that he lived, I don't know if the right way to say it is vicariously, as an activist through his brother. He's always talked about what his brother did in politics and Stanford and all that stuff. So, you know, he absorbed the world around him very well. And I feel, I know Eduardo here is a Vietnam vet, that thing that it did to our veterans, Roberto Cifuentes, the other painter that we know, that creates that profoundness. So, a blessing or curse, however you want to look at it, that profoundness was not without sacrifice. And Jesse had the sacrifice is his story.
I'd like to say something about depth. Artists have have many different attitudes, and not everything that an artist does is very profound. Jesse worked at many different levels, and as I mentioned earlier, I think Mi Vida is as deep as it goes, but it's not the only one that was deep. Others, like the ones that I mentioned, the storefronts, those are a little bit colder, more detached, and so it's not at the same level. Speaking from the point of view of an artist, I can tell you sometimes it is necessary for us to deal with something at a very superficial level. Superficial, but that is important too. And but I think that if an artist is basically just simply superficial, well, that's something else entirely. But all of us deal at many different levels.
10 seconds real quick at the end in terms of politics. I think as his filters left him, he talked a little bit more about politics. We were talking, I guess it was just last year, he was doing portraits of the family as a commission by one of the brothers. And we got into the Mexican-American and the people at the border, and he talked about people at the border as we see today and tonight, tomorrow. That's going to be a big story. I think as an older person myself, when you lose your filters, he would have talked at least more about that. Whether or not he would have illustrated that in his art, you would know better. But that was clearly important to him in his heart and who he represented.
Last word. You're going to like it. Well, to answer your question, I think it was his family. I think it was where he grew up in Prospect Hill. I think it was his mother. I think it was his sister Eva. I think those were always so close to him. His family and his childhood was so rosy. It was football in the streets, and it was track, and it was throwing a no-hitter in Little League. And his childhood never left him, and he never left his childhood. And I think that is why his art remained vibrant to the very end. And you're right, he was always talking about the future of art. So I really think it was the incredible Treviño family that was at the heart of everything.
I think that's a perfect summation. Thank you, Anthony. That was perfect. And so now I just want to thank the panel, Randy Beamer, Gabriel and Anthony Head, and Cesar Martinez for doing an excellent job. I want to mention a little bit about some of the pictures you saw up there. What you saw is also a young Santos Martinez with Esteban Jordan, que en paz descanse also, and Jesse. And Santos is the one that wrote the 2 essays that are in the catalog or program for tonight. And I think that Elaine and Lisa from Degenbella Gallery were some of the first people to open it up for the many people here, many Chicano artists in town. So gracias to them, to Jorge Cortez, who literally fed Jesse all the time. And I loved seeing them on every Friday at Mi Tierra all the time. And so for Jorge, who's not here tonight, and muchas gracias, and Rosemary, who also did so much for Jesse. So again, let's go partake of something to eat and questions. And as y'all are walking out, I think Gabriel has another thing to say.
Well, I just want to make sure that y'all know that we should remember, and maybe Ramon Juan Vasquez is here. His father is the leader of the Chicano art through Centro Cultural Aztlán, Ramon Vasquez y Sanchez, who passed away this week. And we would be remiss if we did not also remember Ramon Vasquez y Sanchez. Rest in peace.
Thank you. Gracias.
I'm going to tell you the truth. No, not for real. I don't think they do.
No, I'm going, oh, you're aware.
That would work. Jesse was
Mr. Velasquez, I wanted to introduce
Hi,
myself.
I think I met you.
No, sorry.
Well, at Navarro House, I did something recently with